The dust of Firebase Kestrel clung to everything, a fine red powder that coated the tongue and settled in the lines of a frown. For Warrant Officer Elara Vance, it was just another shade of grit in a long career defined by it. She stood with the other new arrivals, a duffel bag at her feet, her posture a study in stillness. The wind, a constant, abrasive force on this high desert plateau, whipped loose strands of her dark hair across her face, but she didn't move to brush them away. Her gaze was fixed on the perimeter fence, noting the sag in the wire near the western watchtower and the predictable patrol pattern of the two soldiers walking the line. They mocked her weak voice from the moment she reported in. The supply sergeant, a burly man named Gunner, had to lean in, cupping a hand to his ear. "Speak up, warrant officer," he'd boomed, a smirk playing on his lips. "This wind'll eat your words before they reach me." She had simply repeated her name and assignment, records and administration, in the same quiet, measured tone. It was a voice that carried no natural authority, a low, slightly rough whisper that sounded permanently strained. An old injury, a scar not visible on her skin. She didn't offer the explanation. Explanations were a currency she rarely spent. The other soldiers in the processing line had shuffled their feet, a few sharing amused glances. A woman in uniform with a voice like a shy librarian was an anomaly, an easy target for barracks humor. She saw it in their eyes. Dismissal. They had already categorized her, filed her away under harmless, desk jockey. Non-threat, it was a familiar assessment, and one she had long ago learned to use to her advantage. While they saw weakness, she saw an opportunity for observation. While they listened for volume, she listened for intent. Her assignment was a deliberate step down, a purgatory of paperwork after a career spent in the shadows. Firebase Kestrel was an operational backwater, a training and staging ground far from any real conflict. It was a place for green lieutenants to cut their teeth and for old soldiers to fade away. Colonel Marcus Thorne, the base commander, intended to make sure everyone knew their place. He strode out of the command building, his posture as rigid as the flagpoles flanking the entrance. He was a man carved from granite and procedure, his face a mask of stern authority. His eyes swept over the new arrivals, pausing for a fraction of a second too long on Elara. He addressed the group, his voice a parade ground bark that cut through the wind. He spoke of discipline, of readiness, of the high standards he expected. "Here at Kestrel, we operate at the tip of the spear, even in training," he declared, his gaze finding Elara again. "Every role is a combat role. We need strong voices on the radio, strong leaders on the line. There is no room for hesitation. There is no place to hide." The message was clear, the target specific. It was a public dressing down disguised as a welcome speech. He was telling her and everyone else that she did not belong. The drill they were preparing for, Operation Iron Sentinel, would be the ultimate test, and he had no time for perceived weakness. He expected her to fail, to be a liability. Elara simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable, and gave a slow, deliberate blink. The colonel saw a meek officer accepting her rebuke. He did not see the analyst behind her eyes already deconstructing his leadership style, noting his reliance on volume over substance, his need for dominance. He did not see the predator sizing up the terrain. Colonel Thorne dismissed them with a sharp gesture, turning on his heel and marching back into his sanctum. The other soldiers dispersed, their chatter filled with nervous energy and quiet jokes at her expense. "Guess admin won't be calling in any airstrikes," one private muttered to another, just loud enough for her to hear. Elara hoisted her duffel bag. The weight was familiar, comfortable. She ignored the whispers and walked toward the drab administrative barracks, her steps even and measured. The dust swirled around her boots, and in the distance, the western watchtower stood silhouetted against the setting sun, its perimeter wire still sagging. She made a mental note. The drill was in 3 days. That was more than enough time. Her assigned workspace was a cramped corner in a cavernous, poorly lit records building. Metal shelves stacked with data slates and hard copy files reached toward the ceiling, creating narrow canyons of paper and plastic. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old documents and ozone from the humming servers. Her terminal was an older model, slow and cluttered with disorganized files. It was a deliberate insult, a clerical oubliette. Thorne had buried her here, hoping she would become as silent and forgotten as the obsolete reports surrounding her. For 2 days, she embraced the silence. She worked with a quiet efficiency that went unnoticed. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with an unnatural speed, her eyes scanning lines of text and code without pause. She organized the chaotic digital archives, streamlined the requisition forms, and cross-referenced personnel files, her mind building a complex schematic of the base and its inhabitants. But her real work began when the others left. In the quiet hours of the evening, she wasn't just filing reports. She was reading them. She absorbed everything. Past after-action reviews, topographical surveys, communications protocols, equipment maintenance logs. She learned the names and tendencies of the key personnel. Lieutenant Davies, the young communications officer, was technically brilliant but prone to overconfidence. Sergeant Rodriguez in Motorpool was a genius at improvisation but consistently failed to log his cannibalized parts, creating phantom supply shortages. Private Kenji Tanaka, a young signals analyst, was sharp and observant but too intimidated to speak up in strategy meetings. She saw the stress fractures in the base's operational structure, the tiny cracks in the armor of procedure that Colonel Thorne held so dear. Her observation extended beyond the screen. During her short breaks, she would stand outside the records building, seemingly enjoying the sterile scenery, but her focus was absolute. She watched the flow of men and material. She timed the shifts of the guards, noting the predictable lulls. She observed the way different squads communicated during small-scale drills, the crisp efficiency of Alpha Company versus the slightly more ragged comms of Bravo. She listened, not just to words but to the rhythm of the base. She could hear the subtle strain in the main generator before the lights flickered. She could distinguish the unique radio static signatures of the different company nets, identifying the faint bleed-over from the encrypted command channel. Her quietness, which others saw as timidity, was her camouflage. Soldiers would walk past her, deep in conversation about a faulty sensor on the north perimeter or a glitch in the targeting software for the automated turrets, completely oblivious to the woman who was absorbing every word, processing it and filing it away. She was a ghost in the machine, a silent node in the base's information network. Colonel Thorne saw her once during this period. He was striding across the quad, and she was standing near the mess hall. He gave her a curt, dismissive nod, his expression making it clear he considered her little more than furniture. He saw a clerk. He did not see the woman who had just mentally mapped the blind spots in the base's surveillance camera coverage and identified 3 potential infiltration routes. He heard her soft, "Good morning, sir," and mistook the lack of volume for a lack of conviction. He couldn't comprehend that her mind was a quiet storm of data, a place where variables were constantly being calculated and threats assessed with cold, hard logic. On the morning of the 3rd day, the day Operation Iron Sentinel was to begin, she sat at her terminal, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The base was buzzing with a frantic, preparatory energy. Men shouted, engines roared, and the radio channels crackled with traffic. In the midst of it all, Elara was an island of calm. She had read the operational plan for the drill, the official one. But she had also read between the lines, studied the psychology of the man who wrote it, and cross-referenced it with the known capabilities of the opposing force, a specialized unit from another division known for their unconventional electronic warfare tactics. She knew Thorne had built a plan to fight the last war, a rigid, by-the-book exercise. And she knew it was going to break. The only question was when. The first sign of trouble came 3 hours into the drill. A simulated chemical attack on the south gate. It was a textbook diversion, designed to draw resources and attention while the real assault came from another direction. Elara, tasked with logging incoming field reports into the system, watched the command center descend into a state of controlled chaos. Junior officers relayed information, their voices tight with manufactured stress. On the main holographic map, icons representing friendly units blinked and moved, converging on the fictional gas cloud. Colonel Thorne stood at the center of the room, a grim puppet master, directing his pieces. I want a full contamination sweep. Get Bravo Company in Deccan gear and move them to secure the perimeter. Where is my damage report from the gate? He barked. His voice was the loudest thing in the room, a hammer pounding away at the anvil of the crisis. Alara kept typing, her eyes flicking between her screen and the main map. The data flowed through her. A report of a minor power fluctuation at the east substation. A garbled transmission from a scout team near the northern ridge. A sensor alert from a drone that was dismissed as a ghost image caused by atmospheric interference. To everyone else, they were disparate, unrelated pieces of information, background noise in the storm of the primary attack. To Alara, they were a sequence. The power dip, the comms disruption, the sensor ghost, it wasn't noise. It was a pattern. It was the electronic signature of the opposing force's vanguard, a stealth infiltration team preparing to cripple the base's command and control network. The pressure in the room mounted. Lieutenant Davies, the communications officer, suddenly swore, his face pale. Sir, I'm losing data integrity on the main command net. Something's spoofing our signals. Then fix it, Lieutenant. Thorne snapped, not taking his eyes off the southern engagement. Focus on the primary threat. Sir, it's not that simple, Davies stammered. It's like they're inside our network. I can't isolate the source. Panic began to ripple through the room. The blinking icons on the map froze, then vanished. The main screen dissolved into a cascade of static. Shouts erupted. We're blind, sir. All channels are down. I've lost contact with Alpha Company. Thorne's face hardened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. His perfectly constructed drill was collapsing into a genuine crisis. His authority was being challenged not by an enemy he could see, but by one he couldn't even hear. He was losing control. The noise in the room became a cacophony of fear and confusion. Men who were trained for combat were being defeated by ghosts in the machine. In the midst of the escalating panic, a single sound cut through the noise. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, perfectly clear statement. The primary threat is not at the south gate. Every head turned. Alara Vance had risen from her forgotten corner. She stood with her hands resting lightly on her keyboard, her posture relaxed, her gaze fixed on the static-filled main screen. The sudden silence was more shocking than the previous noise. Colonel Thorne spun around, his face a thundercloud of fury and disbelief. What did you say, warrant officer? He snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. Who gave you permission to speak? Alara didn't flinch. She met his glare without a hint of fear, her own eyes calm and analytical. The chemical attack is a feint, Colonel, she stated, her voice still quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of certainty. The data shows a coordinated electronic attack targeting our C2 infrastructure. The power fluctuation at the east substation at 9:17, the comms blackout from Scout Team Delta at 9:19, and the drone sensor ghost at 9:21 were not isolated incidents. They were sequential markers. The enemy is already inside the wire. Their target is the communications hub, right under this building. She gestured with one hand toward a schematic on her small terminal, which she had pulled up moments before. They're not trying to jam us from the outside. They're staging a physical assault on the node to take down the entire grid. Her delivery was flat, methodical, stripped of all emotion. She wasn't offering an opinion. She was presenting an analysis, a conclusion as solid and irrefutable as a mathematical proof. The room remained silent, the air thick with tension. Thorne stared at her, his mind struggling to process the audacity of the quiet clerk who had just contradicted his command and dismantled his entire tactical assessment in 3 sentences. Lieutenant Davies, meanwhile, was frantically typing at his own console, his eyes wide. He pulled up the archived logs Alara had referenced. The timestamps matched. The events, seen in isolation, were meaningless. But laid out in the sequence she described, the pattern was undeniable, a clear and terrifying prelude to a decapitation strike. She's right, Davies breathed, looking up at Thorne with a mixture of awe and fear. The data supports her analysis. The energy signature from the substation dip is consistent with their EW unit's known cloaking tech. Sir, they could be in the lower conduits right now. The revelation landed like a physical blow. The chaos of a moment ago was replaced by a new, colder dread. The enemy wasn't miles away at the south gate. They were feet beneath them. The drill had become terrifyingly real. Thorne's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Anger at being contradicted, shock at the tactical oversight, and a dawning, grudging realization that the woman he had dismissed as a paper pusher had just seen something his entire command staff had missed. He took a step toward her, his voice low and dangerous. "You have one chance to explain how you know this, warrant officer." Alara didn't offer a lengthy explanation. She simply pointed to her screen. The signal ghost from the drone wasn't random interference. It had a repeating, encrypted data packet embedded in the noise floor. It's a beacon. They're guiding their assault team to the hub. It's an old tactic, but effective against systems that filter for large-scale threats and ignore micro-level anomalies. She had not only identified the problem, she had diagnosed the precise methodology behind it. There was no bragging in her tone. No, I told you so. It was the simple, unadorned presentation of fact. Her skill was undeniable. The entire room, from the frantic lieutenants to the stunned colonel, was now focused on her. The woman with the weak voice had become the center of gravity. The atmosphere in the command center had shifted from chaotic panic to a tense, focused silence. Colonel Thorne stood frozen for a long moment, the gears of his rigid worldview grinding against the undeniable reality of Alara's analysis. The anger in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a sharp, calculating curiosity. He had built his career on predictable threats and by-the-book responses. This woman operated on a different level entirely, seeing a battlefield he didn't even know existed. "Davies," Thorne commanded, his voice tight. "Run a diagnostic on the lower conduit sensors. Full spectrum. Look for the beacon she's talking about." To Alara, he gave a curt nod. "You, move to the secondary comms station. Monitor all backchannel frequencies. I want to know if you hear a pin drop." It wasn't an apology or an admission of error, but it was a significant concession. He was taking her out of the corner and putting her on the board. He was testing her. Alara moved to the auxiliary station without a word. It was an older unit, mostly used for training, with a mix of digital and analog equipment that most of the younger technicians ignored. To her, it was an old friend. She slipped on a headset, her fingers flying across the console, tuning dials and adjusting filters with a practiced economy of motion. While Davies and his team struggled to reboot their compromised primary systems, Alara delved into the raw electromagnetic spectrum, the ocean of noise from which she could pluck whispers. Private Tanaka, the young analyst, watched her from his station. He saw the way her hands moved, not with the hesitant pecking of a clerk, but with the fluid certainty of a master musician. She wasn't just operating the equipment. She was in dialogue with it. He had seen colonels and generals flustered by less, yet she was a portrait of absolute calm, her focus so intense it seemed to bend the air around her. He and the others had mocked her voice, her quiet presence. Now that same quietness felt like a deep, unshakable strength. They had mistaken stillness for weakness, when all along it had been coiled potential. "Got it, sir," Davies shouted, his voice cracking with excitement. She was right. There's a low-frequency encrypted beacon originating from Conduit 7B. It's faint, but it's there. Just like she said. He looked over at Alara with open admiration. Thorne's jaw was set. The first test had been passed. But the drill wasn't over. As if on cue, the lights in the command center flickered violently and died, plunging the room into the eerie red glow of the emergency backup lights. The remaining screens went black. A collective gasp went through the room. "They've cut the main power," someone yelled. "Backup generator isn't kicking in. All systems are dead. We're completely deaf and blind." This was the second test, a challenge of a much higher order. The enemy hadn't just jammed their communications. They had severed the base's central nervous system. The command center, the heart of the operation, was now just a dark, metal box filled with helpless soldiers. Thorne's voice cut through the rising fear. Status report. Now. But there were no reports to give. They were isolated. In the red gloom, a single small screen flickered to life. It was the oscilloscope on Alara's analog station, powered by its own independent battery. A jagged green line danced across its surface. Everyone turned toward the light. Alara was leaning forward, one hand on a tuning dial, her head tilted as if listening to a distant song. She seemed oblivious to the crisis, utterly absorbed in her task. Warrant officer. Thorne's voice was sharp, demanding. What is that? A ghost, she replied, her voice a low murmur in the quiet room. She didn't look up. They didn't just cut the power. They've initiated a cascading logic bomb in the network. But they made a mistake. To coordinate the final shutdown, their EW team has to maintain a constant, low-power carrier wave, a control signal. They're hiding it inside the frequency of the emergency broadcast system, thinking we would never look for a threat on a channel meant for safety alerts. She pointed to a barely perceptible tremor in the green line on her scope. There's a parasitic signal. Very sophisticated. But the old analog gear isn't networked. The logic bomb can't touch it. It can hear things the digital systems are programmed to ignore. She was using obsolete technology to combat a futuristic attack. It was a brilliant, asymmetric solution that no one else in the room would have ever considered. She began patching a series of cables, her movements precise and swift in the dim light. She was bypassing the dead digital network entirely, hardwiring her analog receiver to a single, isolated transmitter. What are you doing? Davies asked, moving closer, his skepticism now fully transformed into awe. I'm giving us a voice, Alara said. She finished her work and flipped a switch. A low hum filled the room, followed by a crackle of static from a nearby speaker. She adjusted another dial, and the static resolved into the clear, calm voice of an enemy operator. Phase 2 complete. Hub is dark. Sentinel is blind. Moving to Phase 3. We will be at the objective in 5 mics. The blood drained from every face in the room. It was the enemy's command channel. Alara had not only identified their attack vector and bypassed their blackout, but she had also tapped directly into their private communications. She had turned their greatest weapon, their stealth, against them. Thorne stared at her, his expression unreadable in the crimson light. The clerk he had relegated to the archives had just single-handedly saved his command from total paralysis and unveiled the enemy's final move. The foundation of his judgment was cracking, and through the fissure, a profound and unsettling question was emerging. Who was this woman? How? Thorne's voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to his earlier booming commands. How did you know to look for that? That's not in any standard training manual. Alara finally turned from her console, her face partially illuminated by the green glow of the oscilloscope. The strain was visible in the tight set of her jaw, but her eyes were clear. She looked directly at the colonel. Standard manuals are for standard threats, sir. There was a beat of silence, and then she spoke a single word, a designation that meant nothing to most people in the room. It was a common technique used by insurgents in the Amborian conflict. We called it a Judas signal. Thorne's eyes narrowed. The Amborian conflict was a black book operation, its details highly classified. Before he could press her, another voice spoke from the shadows near the doorway. Echo. The word was spoken with a gravelly reverence. Master Sergeant Elias Cole stepped into the red light. He was an older man, a veteran of countless campaigns who had recently returned to Kestrel for a final tour before retirement. He had been observing the chaos from the back, his face a grim mask. Now he was looking at Alara with an expression of stunned recognition. Echo, he repeated, his voice thick with memory. Task Force Chimera. I was on the support team for your final op in Murata. I heard the comms chatter. I never knew who it was on the other end of the line, just the call sign. A wave of whispers rippled through the command center. Task Force Chimera was a myth, a ghost unit spoken of in hushed tones in barracks late at night. They were the scalpel used for operations the military officially denied ever happened. They didn't exist on any official roster. Thorne's head snapped toward Cole. "What are you talking about, Master Sergeant?" Cole's eyes never left Alara. "Chimera's lead signals intelligence and EW strategist, sir. They called her Echo because she could hear everything. She could pull a whisper out of a hurricane. She mapped the entire enemy network in Murata with nothing but a field radio and a laptop. The strike that ended that fight? It was her intelligence that guided it." He paused, his gaze softening with a deep, sorrowful respect. "We heard she was hit in that last push. An RPG hit the comms vehicle she was in. They told us Echo went silent." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her quiet, strained voice wasn't a sign of timidity. It was a scar, a physical remnant of a battle no one in this room had the clearance to even read about. The career she'd had was a universe away from the administrative purgatory to which Thorne had condemned her. He hadn't just misjudged an officer. He had insulted a legend. Private Tanaka stared, his mouth agape. The quiet woman he'd snickered at was a war hero of the highest, most secretive order. Lieutenant Davies looked down at his state-of-the-art console, now a useless block of plastic, and then at Alara's jury-rigged analog setup, which was currently the only thing keeping the base from being overrun. Thorne turned back to Alara. The arrogance and dismissal were gone, stripped away to reveal a raw, unvarnished respect. The transformation was absolute. He no longer saw a mousy clerk. He saw the operator she was, the weapon he had almost left to rust in a filing cabinet. The enemy assault team was less than 5 minutes away. The drill had reached its critical nexus. All his plans, his authority, his experience meant nothing. He was facing a problem he could not solve. But she could. He took a deep breath, the air in the dark room feeling charged and heavy. He looked at the woman known as Echo, and for the first time he truly saw her. He saw the weight of experience in her eyes, the quiet confidence that needed no volume to assert itself. The fate of his command, of this entire exercise, rested on her shoulders. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the enemy's voice from her speaker. Thorne straightened his back, his posture shifting from that of a commander to that of a soldier receiving orders. He locked his eyes on hers, and the tone of his voice was completely changed. It held no condescension, no skepticism, only a stark, urgent respect. "Echo," he said, the call sign feeling alien and powerful on his tongue. "What's your command?" Alara didn't hesitate. The moment she had been waiting for, the culmination of her observation and analysis, had arrived. She had seen the board, understood the pieces, and knew the winning move. Her voice, though still quiet, filled the silent room with an unshakable authority. "Kill the emergency broadcast system. Now!" Davies looked at her, confused. "But ma'am, that's their carrier wave. If we kill it, we lose our only link to their comms." "Exactly," Alara replied, her eyes fixed on the green line of the oscilloscope. "Their Judas signal is a parasite. It needs a host. By cutting the power to the EBS, we sever their control signal. It will force their internal comms to switch to a backup frequency, a short-range burst transmission. It will be loud, desperate, and I will be listening for it." It was a brilliant gambit. She was baiting a trap, using their own protocol against them. "Do it," Thorne ordered, his full authority thrown behind her command. Davies, without another moment of hesitation, slammed his hand down on a covered switch, cutting the power to the emergency system. The room fell into an even deeper silence. The crackle from Alara's speaker died. For a terrifying 10 seconds, there was nothing, only the sound of breathing in the dark. Thorne held his breath, his trust in her absolute but untested. Then, a new sound emerged from her speaker. It was a chaotic burst of static, and within it, a panicked voice, much clearer now. "Signal lost. We're blind. I've lost the control wave. Switch to backup channel 7. Alara's fingers were already moving, a blur across the analog tuner dial. She spun it with practiced precision. The dial landed on 7. The speaker erupted with the enemy's frantic, unfiltered communications. What's happening? Command isn't responding. We're at the conduit entrance. Do we proceed? They're at the main access junction for sublevel 2, Alara stated calmly, cross-referencing the chatter with the base schematic in her mind. They're disoriented, she then issued her next command. A simple, elegant checkmate. Master Sergeant Cole, take your fire team to emergency access hatch Charlie 4. You know the location. They will be there in 90 seconds. Colonel, instruct all remaining security teams to converge on sublevel 2, but hold their positions and maintain radio silence. We boxed them in. It was a perfect pincer movement, conceived in seconds. Cole nodded grimly, already tapping the shoulders of his men, who moved out with the silent efficiency of veterans. Thorne relayed the orders to the other teams over a low-power channel Alara had isolated for him. The command center, once a scene of helplessness, was now a finely tuned weapon, and she was the one aiming it. Less than 2 minutes later, Cole's voice came over the radio, calm and professional. Target neutralized. We have captured the entire enemy assault team. Sublevel 2 is secure. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. The drill was over. They had won, not through brute force or by following a rigid plan, but through the quiet intelligence of one woman. The main lights flickered back on as engineering crews, now free from the electronic assault, restored power. The sudden brightness was jarring. In the fully lit room, the scene was stark. The holographic map was still blank. The primary consoles were dark. The only testament to their victory was the small, obsolete analog station where Alara Vance stood, and the stunned faces of the men around her. Colonel Thorne walked slowly toward her. He stopped directly in front of her, his face etched with an emotion she had never expected to see there: humility. He looked at the faint scars on her neck, just visible above her collar, and understood the price she had paid for her expertise. He looked at the quiet confidence in her eyes and understood the depth of the mistake he had made. He didn't offer a handshake or a clumsy word of thanks. Instead, he drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed a flawless parade ground salute. It was the highest form of respect a soldier could offer, a public and unequivocal admission of her superior skill and status. One by one, the other officers in the room followed his lead. Lieutenant Davies saluted. The junior officers saluted. Private Tanaka, his eyes shining with hero worship, rendered the crispest salute of his young career. Even Master Sergeant Cole, from across the room, brought his hand to his brow in a gesture of profound respect for a fellow warrior. They weren't saluting a warrant officer from the records department. They were saluting Echo, the silent guardian who had saved them. Alara met their gesture not with arrogance, but with a simple, dignified nod of acknowledgement. The battle was over. The respect was won. In the days that followed, the culture of Firebase Kestrel subtly changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by a quiet deference. Soldiers would part ways for Alara as she walked across the quad, their greetings now filled with genuine respect. Her voice was still quiet, but now, when she spoke, people leaned in not to strain to hear, but to make sure they didn't miss a single word. She was no longer assigned to the records building. Colonel Thorne had created a new position for her: Special Advisor for Asymmetric Warfare. Her corner desk was replaced with a central station in the command center, her old terminal swapped for the most advanced suite of technology on the base, though she insisted the analog station remain connected. She spent her time training the younger analysts like Private Tanaka, teaching them to look beyond the obvious, to listen to the silence between the signals. She never raised her voice, never boasted of her past. She taught through quiet demonstration and precise, logical explanations. One evening, as the sun set and painted the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Alara stood on the overlook near the western perimeter, the same spot she had observed upon her arrival. The wind was gentler now, a cool evening breeze. She watched the patrols, their patterns now more random, more alert. The sag in the fence wire had been repaired. The base was stronger, smarter. Private Tanaka approached her, holding a data slate. He hesitated for a moment, still slightly intimidated by her legend. "Ma'am?" he asked softly. "I was running a deep spectrum analysis like you showed me, and I found this. It looks like background radiation, but there's a pattern to it. I think it might be a new kind of encrypted signal." Alara took the slate. Her eyes scanned the complex waveforms, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "It is," she confirmed, her voice a low, encouraging murmur. "They're learning to hide in new ways," she pointed to a specific point in the data stream. "But look here. Every encryption has a key, and every key leaves a shadow. You found the shadow." She handed the slate back to him, her gaze returning to the darkening horizon. She was no longer a ghost in the machine, no longer an outcast. She had found a new purpose, not in the heart of a secret war, but in training the next generation to guard the peace. Her dignity, once questioned, was now her armor. Her quiet voice, once a source of ridicule, was now the most respected sound on the base. The wind carried her soft words to the young soldier beside her, and he listened, knowing he was hearing the voice of a true commander. The quiet strength of echo endured, a silent sentinel watching over the fortress of dust and wire.